Hello, welcome to our coffee break with Kardec, our weekly break where we have the opportunity to talk about the book Genesis by Allan Kardec. And today we'll be talking about science in Genesis. Not only Genesis as presented by Allan Kardec, but Kardec here, he means Genesis, all the books that exist in different religions and philosophies and societies, talking about the creation of the universe and life and so on. And it's very interesting because Kardec talks about science and the scientific method here. And he starts by saying to us that at the beginning, when humanity was still developing in terms of knowledge, even intelligence, and morally developing, establishing the moral and civil laws. So everything was seen from a single point of view. It's very normal that the religious person or religious body of a certain religion or creed, they were the ones looking after science, what we call science nowadays, because this division came later, but they would look after the natural aspects of life. They would look after the religious aspects of life, the civil aspects of life. So we see nowadays that some rules which are more related to how you look after your community, they are mingled with ideas of God and religious ideas. And at the beginning it was very common because the amount of knowledge available at the time was very limited. So basically, since we humans are here on Earth, we try to explain our environment. We try to control a bit of that. And that's why we try to explain. Once we understand how it works, then we can actually control it a bit better. It's a question of survival as well, but it is a natural quest. We want to know more. We want to know better the environment where we are. And that in different aspects. So, well, humanity evolved, and then we reached a point where we had a lot of knowledge that was accumulated through centuries. And then we started to create different compartments because it was too much to take, in one bite, as it were. So we had to divide it into compartments, and then we became specialized. It doesn't mean that the surrounding, that our lives are divided into compartments. It's just that the way we try to understand it and develop it in terms of knowledge, in terms of theories, they are divided into these compartments. So, for instance, the universe, the creation of the universe, life itself, it was always something that puzzled humankind. And it puzzled because we experience that on our daily lives. So natural phenomena, from rain, from eclipses, from lightning, all that affected us on a daily basis, as much as our the diseases and plagues. So everything that affected us on a daily basis was very important. We tried to understand the reasons for that. So initially, everything that we couldn't understand, and the majority of things couldn't be understood or explained, then we would attribute to God and say, well, that is God's department. And little by little, our department increased. Not that God decreased in importance, but then we started to understand the natural laws that exist, and that everything works according to these natural laws. So if you know the basis, you can explain the variations that occur based on the same group of laws, of natural laws. So what do we normally do since the very beginning? We observe. We observe, and then from our observations, we try to explain what we see. And of course, the way we observe, it very much depends on the our intelligence and the amount of information that we already have. So we need to have eyes to see, as Jesus himself said in we see it in the gospel. We need to have eyes to see, because even from the neurological point of view, you may not observe or see things that we are not prepared in terms of knowledge, intelligence, and information. It's interesting that once I was told by a neurosurgeon, he said to me that when the Portuguese came to Brazil for the first time, the ships, they stayed along the coast in the northeast area of Brazil. They stayed there for a week before the Portuguese decided to go to the land to meet the Indians there. And during the whole week, the Indians couldn't see, well, they were not that close from the coast, but they could be seen. But because the Indians weren't prepared to see that kind of ship, so that was something very strange to them. They only noticed the Portuguese when they actually came to land and then met the Indians. And he explained to me that in their minds, they weren't prepared to see, because that was new to them. There was something that they could see. So what we observe is very much in accordance to the knowledge we have about that phenomenon, that observation. Well, and then we build theories, and with theories, they help us to see even further, or perhaps suggest us observations that we could make. And that's, in general terms, how science has evolved and evolve until nowadays. We have theories, and based on observations, we have theories and data, of course. And then from these theories, we extrapolate, and then we try to test if that bit of our theory that hasn't been observed can be observed. And when we observe, then we advance a bit further. So, Kardec says that observation in ancient times was very imperfect, very incomplete. So that's why everything was always tainted with blatant errors. And the errors came from a lack of a proper observation and, of course, knowledge, previous knowledge that could help to see, observe, and then draw the necessary conclusions. So as we developed in terms of intelligence, in terms of knowledge, we started to observe things and to observe the laws of nature in a better way. So Kardec says then that people were unable to resolve the riddles of creation until the time in which the key was given by science. And this is the important thing. Some people, sometimes they say, what we knew before can be thrown in the bin. No, what we knew before is rich in experience, is rich in terms of information if we know how to look at that. And I'll explain soon with an example from the Mosaic Genesis. So, for instance, Kardec, then he talks about the different sciences in the 19th century. He picks up astronomy. Astronomy is interesting because Kardec always starts, when he talks about science, he usually starts with astronomy. And the reason is why? Because astronomy was, in my view, one of the main sciences, or one of the areas that called our attention since the very early ages. Imagine before we had artificial lighting, before electricity or wherever, the night used to be very dark, so we could see the skies. And the beauty of the night skies would call the attention of everyone. So that's why astronomy caught our attention since the very beginning. So it started to develop. And astronomy developed when we introduced the telescopes. But to introduce the telescopes, our sciences regarding materials, lenses, objects, and so on, they had to develop. So we made instruments, and of course, sciences in all areas, the sciences, they advanced. So we had new materials, we had electronics, we had all sorts of things to build more sophisticated telescopes. And now we've just launched a new one, the most sophisticated so far, and that's capable of examining the universe in certain frequencies to help us understand. But just the images that we got from Hubble telescope, they show us how much we can see now that we couldn't before, just because our sciences and technologies, they have evolved. So now we have a much precise and better picture. Of course, when we have these telescopes now in space, to do that, we need rockets. So our rocket science had to evolve as well. In all areas, mechanics and physics, we need to understand the gravitational forces around us and how to break the gravitational barrier for then to launch a rocket and it break this barrier and then get into space. So all these, I mean, is the result of different areas evolving. And that is the result of our sciences. That's why Kardec says a science came not to deny what we knew before, but actually to fill in the gaps and give the explanation for that. Because before we had no explanation, we would just believe in things, accept things because we were told how things worked in a sort of vague way. I could even say that in the past we had beliefs. Now we have certainties. Because we have data and we analyze those data and we draw the conclusions of that. Not that we got to the final word in everything. No, we are still evolving. We know that. The same advancements that we were able to do, just by creating more sophisticated telescopes. We are doing this in different areas. And so we have physics, chemistry, and all the other sciences. It's interesting to see that we created compartments for each one of these sciences. In the past, the same person, he was the legislator, he was a medical doctor, he was a physicist, mathematician, and so on. It's interesting because sometimes when we look at the biography of scientists 300-400 years ago, we see that, well, they gave a contribution in medicine, but they also gave a contribution in maths. How come? Because, the same person would embrace everything. Nowadays, it's highly difficult for one single person to do that. That's why we have compartments. But we also should remember that the transition between one compartment and another should be smooth. When physics is getting close to chemistry, there should be a natural transition and not just, a degree that, is difficult to transpose. No. So we have compartments, but these compartments should create a greater picture of everything, and that should be smooth. So Kardec then says that science has been called upon to construct the real Genesis according to the laws of nature. And that science laid down the most important fundamentals based upon irrefutable data. This is it. At the beginning, we knew little, and the information we had was very colorful, almost like poetry. And it was important. Yes, it was important because it was giving us the idea. It was driving us towards what we have today, which is a more scientific way of looking at things, of analyzing things. And Kardec emphasizes that so much, science. He mentions that so many times. He puts to us that it's so important that we can trust the whole work of Kardec, all the books, everything that he did was always based on scientific method. Although some people don't see it because it's a new area. He's talking about the spiritual world and not the material world in general. That's why some people have some difficulties to understand that he used a scientific method all the time through his research, through the communications he received, the analysis he did, and everything. And he emphasizes that. And then he says that, of all the Genesis that we have, the Mosaic Genesis is the closest to the Genesis that we get from scientific data nowadays. And then he says, well, when we have to trust one or the other, and he places that very much. He says that some words in the Mosaic Genesis, they were misinterpreted and mistranslated because that was in accordance to the culture of the time. We know that, I've heard many people saying that. I like very much the work of Professor Rocco Errico in the US. He made a translation, actually. He works with a translation from the ancient Aramaic of the whole Bible. And he found at least 5,000 words that were mistranslated or misinterpreted from the original Aramaic. And also allegories. Sometimes we don't say things meaning that, not exactly those words. We mean something in a different context. We use that every day in different languages. We say something that has, if we take it literally, it's something very weird, but, it is in a different context. But then he says to us that science is moving ahead, is proving what we have, what is real and what is not. And I just end with an example which is very interesting, because the Mosaic Genesis tells us that the beginning, the creation, the universe was all darkness. And then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And when we study the evolution of the universe from the scientific point of view, at about 380,000 years since the Big Bang, the universe was all dark because it was just a huge cloud of hydrogen and helium, and there was no light. But then, after these 380,000 years, gravity started to work on this gas and create clusters of gas. And because of gravity, they started to get together, and the pressure increased and the temperature increased. And then all of a sudden, which is not that brief, it took tens of thousands of years, there was light. This hydrogen, helium ignited, and then we had the stars. And it happened. There is a period in the evolution of the universe that we say is the period of darkness. There was no light, in the sense, no hydrogen or helium, they were the only atoms that existed, saying in the general terms, that existed in the universe at that time. They were spread around as a cloud of gas uniformly spread around the universe. And then gravity had to work and create these clusters and increase the pressure, increase the temperature, until we got so high the temperature that these gases ignited and there was light. Thank you. I'll see you in our next coffee break with Kardec.